Last night was night 85 of the ongoing riots in Portland. And there's a news story by the local outlet that you all know I love, the one that always calls them protests, where it said there were two protests last night. One was confrontational and one was peaceful. Technically, that's true, but here's how it actually played out. The peaceful protest went to residential neighborhoods screaming, "Wake up, mother effer, wake up." Apparently had been marching through the residential neighborhoods all day. And the confrontational one was setting fires and attacking an ICE facility and spray painting "Kill ICE" on these buildings. The acting secretary of the DHS said Portland is clearly still a city in crisis. And it is. I got to say, it comes to a certain point where I don't know how many times I can just keep doing morning updates on the ongoing riots because it does feel a little played out. Here's the problem, though. This is the battle. It's a battle of attrition. Antifa and the far left, these Black Lives Matter extremists, are hoping that eventually they can normalize what they're doing, demoralize local residents, target businesses, drive them all out, and destroy the city. The moment we start accepting this as normal is the moment they start winning. And unfortunately, I fear we are at that point. We actually have a very... I'm sorry, I'm going to say it's actually kind of funny. This post from Dan McCarthy. He's a local journalist, I believe, with KATU, Portland, Oregon. And first he says, "We're back at the ICE building in South Portland this morning. 3 people were arrested during overnight demonstrations, the second straight day of protests here. I don't know if the feds have returned. ICE, I believe, actually did come out, but I'm not entirely sure. But he has this chart. He says, here's a timeline of demonstrations that Portland police say they have responded to in the month of August. There were 3 more arrests at the ICE building in South Portland overnight, which was declared an unlawful assembly." This image, it made me laugh. Let me make it smaller so you can see. This is just for the month of August. And for those that are just listening, it is a chart showing the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, the 1st to the 19th. And all of the days that have been declared riots and what happened. We can see what looks like bottles being thrown. I don't know what this is, tear gas, fires being set. I don't know what some of these are, flashbangs, but it is quite funny. There are several days throughout the month where there's been no arrests, but only about 5. And I just think it's very cute, I guess. They've actually put together this infographic. So much thanks. Police declare unlawful assembly at Portland ICE building, 3 arrested. I'm going to read this because I don't want to allow Antifa to normalize what they're doing. But I've got some stats. Regular people do not like this. I mean, the average voter doesn't like this. Democrats, for some reason, are the outlier. Most likely voters, according to a poll from Rasmussen, say they want the police to crack down on this and put an end to it. They want to normalize this. They want us to forget about it, get bored with it so that they can keep doing it and keep getting away with it. We need to call this out every single time and say they must be arrested. But I must cite to you a bit of data that I love to cite right now. I did a segment on it yesterday, mentioned it in my main segment yesterday. According to CNN, Donald Trump has closed the gap with Joe Biden in 15 battleground states, bringing Biden's lead down to only 1% in the key states that he actually needs to win the presidency. Nobody cares if California or New York swing for Joe Biden. We get it. They will. So the national polls are less relevant. This means Donald Trump is in range. I mean, the margin of error in this poll is 4%. You may have heard me say this already, but I got to bring it up in the context of this unlawful assembly riot, if you will, because we also have this story. Democrats disagree, but most likely U.S. voters favor crackdown on violent protest and protesters. We can just call them rioters, but sure, fine. I get it for the sake of the poll. Violent protester, sure. Voters are ready for police to end the continued violence, as 47% of unaffiliated likely voters think police should crack down on the protests. But 47%, does that mean the majority is in favor of these ongoing riots? I don't think so. I think the 47 may be a plurality, but we'll come back to this. I want to make sure I give you the actual news update here. This is from KATU. They say 3 people are in custody this morning following the second night of protests at the Immigration and Customs Enforcement building in South Portland. Most of the group left the ICE building at around 2 a.m. Friday. According to Portland police, protesters once again set fires, lit fireworks, and threw projectiles at federal officers and later at Portland officers. The gathering was deemed an unlawful assembly. However, police did not declare demonstrations a riot as they had the night before. I don't know what the difference is if they're setting fires. They literally spray paint, kill ICE. So sure, whatever. More arrests were made overnight, Thursday, than on Wednesday night. The demonstrations at the ICE building on Wednesday night gained a reaction from acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf, who said, "Last night in Portland, a DHS federal facility was attacked by violent criminals. Local police called a riot again and made arrests. After 80 plus straight nights of violence, Portland clearly remains a city in crisis." Portland police say it was one of two mass gatherings overnight. Earlier in the night Thursday, a group of protesters gathered at Kenton Park and marched through North Portland, briefly stopping at the Portland Police Association. Police said the group of marchers returned to the park and dispersed with no initial reports of violence. Yes, I believe that is absolutely on purpose. They're going to residential neighborhoods. That's the point. In this tweet from Kitty Shackelford, I'm not entirely sure who this is, but this was a tweet it's got 4,000 retweets. Portland starting early in neighborhoods, flying into fits of rage over white men on their porches and the U.S. flag, F your flag. This is how it expands. They started going into residential neighborhoods at night. Now they're going into residential neighborhoods in the morning. And as I said, their goal is to normalize this. Perhaps people will become demoralized and they will leave. Maybe there will be a recoil and a backlash, which results in people actually snapping back, voting hard Republican or something. But we have this story from KOIN, Oregon Portland protests fanning out across the city. Now, this is from the other day, but this is an actual mainstream news story pointing out they are coming to the neighborhoods. Remember when everyone was saying back in June that Antifa was planning on showing up in the suburbs and the neighborhoods, and then the mainstream media was like, this is fake news designed to scare people. And then they did, and they still are, and they are fanning out more. Remember when they said the protests in Portland are just in a 12-block radius around the courthouse, and now they're fanning out across the city, and this website, Coin, actually put together a map of all the places they started going to, and it's random. This is really fascinating. I think this might be from the police, but that chart I showed you from August actually shows, I don't know if I can make this bigger. It actually shows, maybe I can make it bigger, all of the riots throughout the past couple of months. So you can actually see that chart I showed from August where you have the riots. It looks like July was substantially worse. Look at all the fires they were setting. So, there you go with that. But let's read the story, because the big issue I want to focus on is how this is going to affect the election, especially considering they're targeting residential neighborhoods. They say the riot outside the ICE facility on Southwest Macadam Wednesday night is just the latest in a series of clashes outside the city, county, and federal facilities during the 83 consecutive nights of protests in Portland. So again, this story was from the 20th, but it's about the 19th. They say on May 29th, the first night of the protests and the first declared riot, demonstrators targeted the Justice Center and other downtown venues, including Chase Bank and Pioneer Square Mall. Over time, the Hatfield Federal Courthouse was targeted, which brought a heavy-handed federal response. Other frequent targets included the Portland Police Association building, the Penumbra Kelly building, and the PPB North Precinct. Then on Tuesday, the Multnomah County building on Southeast Hawthorne, which is, as Chair Deborah Coffrey said, the place where people get married, come to get their passports, and come to celebrate their cultural traditions. And it was vandalized during another riot. According to Portland police, there have been 17 declared riots during these 83 nights of protest. The ICE facility is a federal detention facility that has been a flashpoint over the past few years. The Occupy ICE movement tried to shut it down 2 years ago during earlier Trump administration efforts to crack down on immigration. Federal officers are back in the streets battling protesters. So there it is. There's confirmation. The feds are back out. There are also reports of planned clashes at different parts of the city this weekend. KOIN 6 will continue to follow this story. It's Friday. Friday isn't the worst of the week. Saturday is. So I think tomorrow is going to be particularly bad. But how will this impact the election? And that's the big question I have. I want to make sure we stay on top of all of this, the riots, and not allow these people to get away with normalizing their psychotic behavior. But we are just coming off of the DNC and all the stupid things they've been doing. Let me just first point out that Mayor Lori Lightfoot, as we talked about last night in the IRL podcast, is threatening to have protesters arrested. She won't allow them near her house. In fact, locals call it According to the story from Chicago's WGN, they call it Fort Lori. These Democratic politicians, as far as I can tell, are acting like despots. Let's read the data, however. Texas Insider, citing Rasmussen, says, when asked which is closer to their own thinking, 50% of likely U.S. voters say that police should crack down on the violence and protests to bring them to an end, while 38% disagree and say the protests should be allowed to continue until the protesters decide to stop them. And 11% are undecided. Most also say the protests will be important to their vote in the upcoming elections. There's sharp partisan disagreement on the question, though, according to the new Rasmussen Reports National Telephone and Online Survey. And you know why? Because the left gets their news from the narrative fake news machine, and the right, the coalition, whatever you want to call it, you got liberals, you got moderates, you got conservatives, Trump supporters, you got liberals voting for Trump. These are people who are getting their news from various different sources and talking to each other. You know, the other day I did a segment on Trump buying the Washington Post full page takeover. Like when you go to the Washington Post website, it just takes over the whole thing. The people who go to Washington Post aren't actually seeking out news. They're just going to the Washington Post and saying, tell me what to think. The people who are coming to YouTube and following other people on Twitter are saying, I want a mixed bag of opinion to better understand. As they say, the truth is usually closer to the middle. Thus, if you're on social media and exploring the news for yourself, you're more likely to be getting the truth, at least in my opinion. I do think mainstream media has their moments and they have a tendency to be pretty good. I use them myself. Now, Texas Insider is not NewsGuard certified. I do use NewsGuard, but they're citing Rasmussen, so I think it should be fine. They say just 31% of Democrats agreeing, while 47% of unaffiliated likely U.S. voters indicate they think police should crack down on the protests. 56% of Democrat likely U.S. voters say the protests should be permitted to continue until protesters want to end them. And 75% of Republican likely U.S. voters think the police should crack down on the protests and protesters. So what I would say is, I don't know if they actually show the data here, but considering when you step out of partisanship, there is a majority who want the protests to end, and there is a large group, double digits, who are undecided. It stands to reason the 47% of unaffiliated voters is the plurality, meaning while not most people, it's very likely there is a large portion of unaffiliated voters who are undecided, meaning it is not the majority of people who are independent or unaffiliated who would like to see these protests continue. There's probably a large portion of undecided. Basically, what I'm trying to get at there, very, very, very good news for Donald Trump. He needs the middle. He needs the unaffiliated to support him. They say while the violent protests and rioters champion defunding the police and using that money for social or community outreach programs, 66% of Americans oppose defunding the police in the community where they live, and 61% believe violent crime is likely to go up in those communities that do defund the police. You may have seen the viral commercial from Kimberly Klacik. If you haven't, check it out. It is massive, getting like 140,000 retweets in a day. She is a Republican woman running in Baltimore. And in her ad, she talks to several black people in Baltimore, asking them how they feel about defund the police. And of course, these testimonials, they say it's bad. That's what we've seen from the polling. 81% of black Americans think the police are spending just enough time, or 20% of black Americans say they want more time spent in their neighborhoods. Not necessarily more police, but they certainly don't want to defund them and get rid of them. So when you see people marching through neighborhoods and they're in Portland as they're expanding, you're going to see a lot of people recoil and say, no way. In fact, Black Lives Matter, though it does have a lot of support, may be the catalyst for Donald Trump's massive victory. I will tell you this, and I've said it before. For me, the riots were a major turning point. I went out and bought guns because these people were not too far from where I live. And they're smashing and destroying. And let me show you something. It is not a social justice protest. These are lies. Portland vintage toy store owner says thieves stole irreplaceable items and a sense of security. The building's security camera footage shows what appears to be two people hauling off stacks of collectibles from Billy Galaxy Vintage Toy and Collectibles. Don't come to me and tell me these people are fighting for justice when they're looting a vintage toy store. I've been to this place. It's awesome. They got mint condition toys from way back when, old comics. The place is great. You want to come to me and say that these people in Portland who are protesting and marching through the neighborhoods are doing it for a good cause. I'm going to call you a liar. The people in Louisville who are shaking down businesses are doing it for money. And their ideology is spreading, has spread and dominated the Democratic Party. Absolutely. The plurality of Democrats now adhere to a far left ideology. And that's, I'm extrapolating a bit, but there's a Gallup poll from 2018, which shows 48% of the Democratic Party identify now as liberal and less as moderate or conservative. There used to be conservative Democrats. Now you just have this expanding fringe extremist ideology, and it's a mask. It's a shield for them to go around stealing valuables. This guy films it. So when we say the violent riots should be shut down, we're not talking about some dude banging his kumbaya drum in the street saying, peace among all peoples. We're talking about those who don black masks, firebomb buildings, spray paint kill ICE, and have been doing it for now, 85 nights in Portland. And it's been sporadic throughout several different parts of this country, to the point where the disgusting and despotic mayor of Chicago straight up says, I have a right to make sure that my home is secure. The mayor of Chicago is defending having police barricade and defend her city block, but no one else allowed to defend themselves. Again, perhaps it's just wishful thinking, but as many Republicans have started saying, Chicago is in play. New York is in play. California is in play. It's maybe not necessarily true, but what they're saying is that these places have become so awful, they may actually start voting for Donald Trump. And I think the data here suggests it's likely. One of the reasons why the Democratic Party may be becoming further and further left is not because the ideology is spreading, but because regular liberals are walking away. And I'm sure you've seen it. I don't know if I have the mug here. There's a book given to me by Jack Murphy. Had him on the IRL podcast, Democrat to Deplorable. 9 million Obama voters switched for Donald Trump. And by now, I can only imagine it is substantially greater in number. I've been, a default liberal left-leaning individual most of my life. And now I'm saying, no way. So when people ask me how to identify, I don't say Democrat. I say independent. So now the Democratic Party loses another moderate member of the party, in a sense. To be fair, I voted for Obama in 2008. I left a long time ago. Not a big fan of the Democrats, but I certainly have never considered voting Republican until all of this started going on. When you start seeing regular people walk away from the Democrats, it creates a skewed perspective. So look at it this way. Let's say you've got moderates and far left, and they say, oh, it's 50-50. But then the moderates all leave. The same amount of progressives in the Democratic Party now make up a majority or a plurality. They aren't necessarily taking over so much as, they are taking over, but they're not building their ranks for the most part. They are building their ranks, but what I mean is the takeover of the Democratic Party is more to do with disaffected liberals being sick and tired of this and leaving. Now consider this. If I was polled and they said, what do you think about the riots? I would say, shut them down. Then they would ask me, how do you identify in terms of party? I'd say unaffiliated. And then they would add me to the unaffiliated ranks, not the Democrat ranks. Even though if it was, 10 years ago, I probably would have said as, Democratic, slightly center left Democratic or something to that effect. As more and more people walk away, it's going to skew the polls, which gets interesting. Now we don't know exactly what's going to happen in this upcoming election because of so many people who have walked away and so many new voters who have joined Donald Trump. They say, when it comes to the violent anti-police protests, most voters agree that Trump sides with the police, while Democratic leaders side with the protesters. 72% of all likely U.S. voters say they are concerned about the growing level of violent protests nationwide. 43% are very concerned. 62% say the growing level of violent protest is important to their vote in the next election. Listen to this. Most voters agree that Trump sides with the police. It was really strange in this poll. Like 10% said Trump sides with the protesters. And somebody mentioned about 10% of people will just randomly give answers and just they don't care. Something like that. Because I certainly don't think any sane, rational person thinks that Trump identifies with Antifa or Black Lives Matter. But they certainly answered that way. But here's what's interesting. If 50% of people say that the police should crack down, and most people think that the Democrats side with the protesters, you have a very large portion of people who believe the Democrats are siding with a group of people who need to be cracked down upon by the police. Get it? I can't imagine those who are saying, shut down the riots, are somehow agreeing with the Democrats and supporting them. No, that's absolutely not the case. Unfortunately, it seems like Portland is just going to beg. Portland Police Chief pleads for an end to the endless destruction as 200 rioters start fires in the street and attempt to storm ICE building while spraying graffiti and shining lasers at cops on 84th night. This is just the previous night of rioting. Is that all they can do? All they can do is beg. Okay, then I'm convinced that based on the polls, Trump's going to win. I am. And you can thank Portland for it because they are giving all of the footage Trump could ever ask for his campaign. And he's slapping Biden's pictures all over it. You know why? Because people think the Democrats support this. Why? They do. They literally do. They shield them. They lie about them. And maybe they're going to come around. They're starting to come around, but too little, too late. Sorry. We're going to see more riots tonight. I believe Saturday will be a flare-up again because the DA in Portland won't stop this. And I can only imagine they're all secretly trying to get Trump elected because all of this helps him. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.